So I've got a comment here. It was by Pat Roberts. I don't know if you can see it, but the comment was, a video I'd like to see you do is a 372 hybrid using all Huztl bottom end, using cases, crank bearing, seals, but using an OEM top end. Throwing away the aftermarket bearings and seals without a good honest test of them is a bit unfair to viewers who would like to see how they perform. Thanks, eh? Okay, so I want to address that because I think that that's relevant comment. The bearings that were in here were regular Chinese metal cage bearings, and I don't necessarily have a problem with the bearings that were in here. By the way, everybody, welcome back to my 372 build here. This is on an all aftermarket build. It's at least it's intended to be an all aftermarket build. This is the Huztl kit from China, and I'm trying to put this together with as much of those parts as possible, and we're going to do some modifications along the way. But the comment essentially had to do with the bearings and seals, and essentially why didn't I keep them, and you would have liked to have seen me keep them. So I didn't take out the bearings necessarily because I didn't like them. I'm sure the bearings that were in here probably would be okay. But I removed them to check and see if I could actually cold press them out and cold press new bearings in and not have a problem. And while I was doing that, I also wanted to test that, number one. Number two, I also happen to have Japanese-made nice bearings. So since it's really so easy to press bearings in and out, and the nice Japanese bearings were not that expensive, why not? I definitely wanted to replace the seals because if you've seen my other videos with the crank tools that I've just posted, I wanted to make sure that as I pulled the cranks through, I wanted to make sure that as I pulled the crank through the bearing, the seal did not invert. Now I know that there are plenty of guys that do this over and over again and don't have trouble, but I like my way, and I want to make sure that I don't have a problem. So my opinion is that the proper way to do it is to put the crank in, seal the case, then put the seals in after, and preferably with the Coke can trick. On the 372 you don't need the Coke can trick because the flywheel side is tapered and the seal is going to go on there without any trouble, and the PTO side, in fact, doesn't actually contact the crank in any way, so you just have to make sure you get it to the right depth. So let's put some seals in. Been waiting to do this for a while, huh? Let's put some seals in and see if we can get that to go. So because I had to pull the seals out in order to use my crank tool to pull the crank through, might as well get new seals. And when you're doing new seals, what you want to do here this is just a little bit of brake cleaner to clean off that surface. You do want a little bit of oil. On the crank itself, but not on the sealing surface, not on the metal rather. So then how are we going to get, let's get a little bit of anaerobic sealer in here. I had one guy comment he actually used pipe dope for this. Okay. I suppose whatever floats your boat. The anaerobic sealer, this happens to be Loctite 518. The anaerobic sealer, theoretically, it will not set unless it's in an anaerobic environment. Therefore, you don't have to worry about this getting in the bearings. Now, I'd rather it not get in the bearings, but still, the bearings are well greased. Okay, so I've got the anaerobic just around the outside, and a little bit of oil on the crankshaft itself. Take the seal. Always check and make sure that that silly spring is in there and it's in there properly. You're going to press this in and rotate slightly. Gentle, gentle, gentle. Now, you can buy a tool to do this, or you can just use a good old-fashioned socket. Now, Walter has got some nifty stuff, so if you check out a Fleet Commands channel, he's got some nifty stuff to do this, where it's like you kapomp and it's in. So I'm not quite there yet. Just use a good old-fashioned socket. This one happens to be 16mm deep socket. And you start tapping. Now, when do you stop? Well, the answer is basically when you're over, there's a lip here. When you're over the lip, when you're over the taper on the crankshaft, and I like to see it I basically like to see the seal more or less flush with the end of the taper here as well. And that's pretty even all the way around. So we're a little beyond the end of the taper there. We're flush all the way around. Excess here. Do you really need the sealant? Who knows? There, your flywheel side seal is installed. That's as easy as that. And the crank will rotate a little more difficultly because that seal is now installed. But that's okay. PTO side. So, essentially the same thing here, not a whole lot different. A little bit of brake cleaner. If you're trying to use anaerobic sealer, you don't want grease on the sealing surface. So you have to make sure that sealing surface is indeed clean. Tiny bit of the anaerobic again. All the way around where the metal seals on the metal. Now in this case, you don't need any oil on the crankshaft because this particular seal does not seal directly against the crankshaft. Make sure your ring is there, the spring. Place the seal down, same thing. Just a socket. And here I kind of go till flush. And if you use a big enough socket, then you can't drive it too far. So this is a smaller socket. So nice and even all the way around. At this point, you're going to want to do one of the very, very important thing, and that has to do with a teeny tiny little O-ring that's supposed to go in here. Hang on. So I have a special video just outlining this particular part number, 503-26-30-19, O-ring 371. Well, it's for all these type of saws. They're these tiny, teeny tiny little O-rings. And it was happenstance, I happened on a pile of them on eBay. They are tiny. So let's let's see if we can get in there and look at it. Now I have a whole separate video on these particular O-rings, but they are tiny and they are fragile, and all that they do, you get them over that, a little bit of oil, a lot of oil, but whatever, a little bit of oil, and then what you do is you take your bushing and push it down, gentle. Now this is not the Huztl bushing. I'm going to look for that in a second. But what that little O-ring does is it actually goes into it interfaces between the bearing and the bearing. The inner race of the bearing is actually sealed to the crank because it's press fit. So those are two interfaces there that are technically one. That O-ring sits kind of between the two and seals against this particular bushing. Now this particular bushing then also seals this edge of it, the right here. That edge actually, this edge right here. This seals against the rubber part and creates your seal overall. It's kind of a wonky setup. And honestly, I don't even know if Huztl includes that little O-ring there. I'm going to check on that momentarily. They probably include the bushing, which they better, because, yeah, you have to. So here's the bushing. I did not see an O-ring in the kit. Finding it, even if it was there, is probably impossible. So, yet another part that you probably need to buy. So this bushing goes in and you just press it and twist. The O-ring's just sitting there. It's going to go down and seal as you press and twist this in. So you go nice and easy, press and twist. You say okay, get a little nervous. I wish it was beveled a little bit better. A little bit of oil on here. Okay, a lot of oil on there. There it goes. Press and twist. She's seated. That's it. So this will seal even better when the clutch is fully on here. And that is the intention of this. Basically is to hold that down so the bushing here grabs the O-ring and it actually creates a tight seal. And as this is spinning, that O-ring spins with the bushing and with the crank, so there's essentially no wear on the O-ring. The only wear is on the outside of the bushing, between the bushing and the rubber seal. And hopefully there's minimal wear there, right? Yeah. So assuming we want to do a pressure test, we're not going to install any of the goodies in here until we have that pressure test done. So one thing we can do next, I guess, is aim for putting the piston and cylinder on and see if we can actually get some timing numbers. Let's do that. So before I get to the piston, one thing that actually Brad Snelling showed was how to remove these silly tabs up top here. And you just do it with a razor. And let's see. Put it flat. Get the razor in here, pull it flat. This razor. Not quite as sharp as I'd like. There we go. That's one. Always try to give credit where credit's due. I have very few original ideas. I like to take the best of what I find and go with that. And if I can come up with something original, awesome. And if I can't, then I don't feel too bad, because somebody else came up with an awesome idea anyway. So I saw that method from Brad, so Brad, thank you. You know what? Works perfectly, so very happy with that. Let's look at the piston. So we've got the piston, the rings, we're going to ignore that for the moment, circlips, and the piston pin is around here, the wrist pin bearing rather. So this is the wrist pin. I've got tons of wrist pins around here. Let's see. $10 says that's an original 372. The original 372 actually looks thinner. Lighter too. I'll bet it's lighter. Don't worry about that for now. Okay. So, circlips. Now, a couple things. These circlips, these Chinese circlips, some of them tend to not have quite as much springiness to them. And they also have these giant ears. The issue with the ear being big is that there's a lot of momentum with the piston. And as it's reversing direction, if you're going from all the way down to going back up, and this is facing that way, then it is possible that this will spring because there's momentum in the end of that clip. So certainly one thing to do is to grind that clip off a little bit. Visually the piston looks fine. Some of these are machined, you know, terrible, and they got skirts that are different thicknesses and whatever visibly, and this seems to be okay. One part that is theoretically bad luck is the bearing. So I know one guy on the forum on OPE is running one of these, and it's totally fine in his saw, so I guess I'll just run this in this particular saw. It's not missing anything, so honestly it looks fine. So when I'm getting timing numbers and putting this thing together initially, I don't put the rings in. Just how I do it. The bearing goes in here. Wrist pin in. Okay. The arrow is always pointed towards the exhaust. So now that the piston's in, I'm not going to put the circlips in because we're just getting timing numbers. Don't forget to put the circlips in. Yeah. Rings and circlips. So we're going to put these on my favorite metal tray so we don't forget them. So I've got my degree wheel here that I'm going to work on in a bit. And I've got other videos on how to do that and how to set that up, and Mastermind has an excellent video on how to set up a degree wheel, so I'm not going to go into that too much. But what I do want to do is put the cylinder head on, and of course we're just doing this temporarily. We just want to get some quick timing numbers, a squish. Might as well do it without the base gasket here. Well, I guess, should I do it with or without or what? I don't know. Do you guys care? You want me to do it with the base gasket? Might as well get the numbers with the base gasket. Okay. The unit. Now I'm also noticing that the skirt is running into a little bit of tab here. Really sharp set of diagonal cutters because I got this little tabby thing here. Might as well cut this too. Obviously you'd like to avoid that going down into the case and into the bearings. Should go down gentle and easy. Only need a couple of bolts to hold this down. because we're just doing a temporary leg. And one of the tricks for bolts is grease. A little bit of grease on the end of your Allen here. It holds the bolt. These are just regular old M5 Allens. I really don't like to tighten them too much. So put it down gentle. Gentle, that's it. Make sure the thing turns over okay. And it does. I just visually line up a couple of marks. You can do a coat hanger and all that stuff, but we're not going for super precision here. Just look and visually check and see if you're close to top dead center. So probably a better way to do it, just to so what you do is you just visually by eye kind of figure out where top dead center is, and that's where your wheel initially gets set. And then what you do is you put your piston stop in, and this is just a cheap piston stop. Literally this is actually a die holder. It works, it's aluminum, it's not going to hurt anything. And that is 37 degrees there, so run it over on the other side, and that is 39. Go back over here. 35, 36. So we're actually really close. Right off the bat, it's really close. So we're going to move this over to 37 or so. Tighten this down just a tad more. Dink, where it stops. Kind of moved it over only a little bit to 36. Let's check over here. Still 39. We'll move it a couple of degrees, tighten it down a little more. 37.5. 37. So for what we're doing, that's going to be close enough. So now we know we have top dead center because it's balanced on both sides. So now we can look and see what our timing numbers are. You need a flashlight. So light goes down the center. You look at the exhaust. And the exhaust roof here is actually pretty even. Just see light there. So our initial exhaust timing from top dead center is 90, and then 80, 90, 95, 100. Our exhaust timing right there is right on 100. 100.5. Let's say our intake timing, so you check and see when the intake opens. Right about, I don't know if you can see that. Let's go down. So that's open right when it closes. So that's 73, 72, 73. So let's call the exhaust 101, 73. Then we look inside for the transfers, and this is hard to see. So this side is going to be stock. So I just want stock number somewhere around there. 120, 123, 90, 100, 110, 123. So not bad numbers really to start. On the 372s, I look for 100, 80, and 120 is usually pretty well accepted as good numbers for a 372. So we're not that far off. Could use a little bit more intake. Could use a little bit more intake. Not very much more on the exhaust. Now, or not very much more on the transfers. Now, the transfers are nice because what we're going to do is we're going to, now that we have this timed, we have effectively we have the wheel set to the crank and the piston, so we know exactly where top dead center is. So we don't want to mess with that until we set squish. So we got to check squish. Now this is 030 solder or thereabouts. Yep, and it doesn't even mark. Squish is bigger than 030. This is bigger solder. Old stuff that I happen to have. No way, is it that big? It's bigger than that. That's not good. That is going to have a heck of a hard time generating compression. So it's about 60 thousandths, and it's bigger than 60 thousandths. So let's take the base gasket out, at least. Yay. Now, of course, you take the base gasket out, and you're going to alter the timing numbers. Now, I probably am not going to do... I'm not going to do my usual milling on this saw. I'm not going to mill anything here because we want to build this kind of poor man's porting style. Doing something to the base and squish band here would definitely be in order. So let's remove this base gasket. And while we're at it, we'll measure it. .21 thousandths. Pretty typical. So we're putting it back down without the base gasket. Right. Well, that definitely marked there. .38 thousandths. Yikes. Well, it looks like we're doing a no base gasket build, unless the other cylinder happens to be better. Goes smooth up and down. Let's check squish. Looks kind of big to me. 47 thousandths. So even with no base gasket, it's north of 40 thousandths. Squish. It's a lot of squish. Kind of difficult for these to generate pop if they have that much squish.